I need you to look at something. 25 Americans sailed into the Arctic in 1881. This man froze to death in his sleeping bag. This man was shot by order of his commanding officer. This man was eaten. This life is getting almost unbearable. I am afraid we will all go mad. The man writing these words was Sergeant David Brainard. He was at a place called Cape Sabine, trapped in a tent with 24 other Americans who had been sent north for science. Of the 25 men that sailed north, only 6 came back alive. What really happened to the other 19? My name's Joe, and this Buried Earth video is definitely worth your time. So, 1881, the world scientific community had an idea, and it was actually a good one. Instead of competing nations sending separate Arctic exhibitions to plant flags, what if they all worked together? Real shared science. They called it the first International Polar Year. 11 countries took part, and the United States agreed to set up the most ambitious station of it all, the most northern research outpost ever attempted by any nation. The man chosen to lead it was Lieutenant Adolphus Greely, 37 years old, Civil War veteran, Signal Corps officer, disciplined, well organised, and most importantly, completely inexperienced in polar travel. He had never been north of the United States before. The army gave him this command because he knew how to run things, not because he knew how to survive on ice. His team was 25 men in total. Most of them appear in a single photograph just here, taken just before they set sail. 22 faces, healthy and in uniform, looking like ordinary soldiers and specialists. None of them had any idea what was about to happen to them. Among them was Greely's second in command, the expedition's most determined explorer, a young astronomer just 22 years old, a doctor, a man with a criminal past hiding under an assumed name, and 2 Greenlandic Inuit hunters who would do some of the most important work of the entire expedition. These men were not fools. They weren't unprepared. They were, on paper, the most ambitious American Arctic team ever assembled. And before everything fell apart, they actually did what they set out to do. July 7th, 1881. The party leaves Newfoundland on a steamer called the Proteus. They reach Lady Franklin Bay on Ellesmere Island in early August. They unload 350 tons of supplies, and they start building. This isn't a tent camp. They're constructing a proper scientific station. This is buildings, magnetic observation huts, meteorological equipment running around the clock. They name it Fort Conger. The first winter sets in. The sun goes down on October 15th, 1881. It does not come back up for 137 days. But the men are doing fine. They've got food planned for 3 years. They've got science occupying them. They run lectures, they hold debates, they write a camp newspaper, they cook holiday dinners. Brainard records all of it in his diary. The routine, the discipline, the success. If you want to understand what kind of expedition this was, they were not a desperate party fighting for their lives. They were running one of the most disciplined Arctic stations the world has ever seen. They had every reason to believe that they were going to come home as heroes. And then in May 1882, they actually did the thing. Lieutenant Lockwood and Sergeant Brainard set out on a sledge journey north. With them was Frederick Christiansen, the Greenlandic Inuit hunter. 3 men, dogs, sledges, food. They went further north than any human being had ever gone before. They beat the British furthest north record by about 4 miles, the highest latitude anyone had ever researched on Earth. And here's the part that most retellings might skip. One of these 3 men was Inuit, Frederick Christiansen. His sledging skills, his survival expertise, and his ability to read the sea ice, it all made the achievement possible. Lockwood gets remembered, Brainard gets remembered, Christiansen gets reduced to a footnote in most histories. Hold on to that name though, Christiansen, because he's going to come back into this story in a way that is going to break your heart. So the plan was always annual supply ships. Each summer, a vessel would push north with food and a rotation crew, swap men in and out, and keep Fort Conger running. Summer 1882, the relief ship Neptune leaves Newfoundland in July. It hits ice in Kennedy Channel, and it cannot get through, so it drops some emergency supplies at Cape Sabine, about 250 miles south of Greely Station, and then it turns home. The men at Fort Conger wait. By August, they realise the ship isn't coming. They've got 2 more years of food, so they'll be okay. The science continues. Brainard keeps writing. Summer 1883. This is the one that has to work. Lieutenant Garlington gets an assignment. He's given the Proteus, the same ship that carried Greely north 2 years earlier. His orders are explicit. Reach Fort Conger at all costs. July 22nd, 1883. The Proteus is crushed in the ice in Smith Sound. The crew survives, the supplies don't. Garlington had been ordered to offload the food at Littleton Island first, the agreed fallback cache point, before pushing north. He didn't do it. He carried everything into the ice with him. When the ship sank, all of it went down. I want to be honest about what this means. The relief mission designed to keep the starving station alive carried the food into the ice instead of leaving it at a safe point first. One bad decision, made by a man on a different ship hundreds of miles south of where it mattered. That decision would kill 19 people. Greely's contingency was clear. If no ship came, abandon Fort Conger and travel south to Cape Sabine, where caches of food were supposed to be waiting. August 9th, 1883, they leave the station in small boats, through ice, through storms, 51 days at sea before they finally ran to Eskimo Point on September 29th. October 9th, 2 scouts returned from Cape Sabine with the news. The Proteus is gone. The caches only contain 1,300 rations. For 25 men, that's about 50 days of food. That's not a winter plan. That's a countdown. October 1883. The party moves to Cape Sabine and builds what they call Camp Clay. This isn't a building. It's a stone wall with an upturned boat over it. A canvas tent stretched over the top. The dimensions recorded was 25 feet long, 17 feet wide, 4 feet high. For 25 men. They share sleeping bags, 2 or 3 a bag. They can barely lie at full length without touching somebody else. The roof was so low that nobody could stand up inside. Outside, the Arctic winter was closing. Temperatures hit -25 Fahrenheit. The sun is going down. The wind never stops. Inside the shelter, the air is awful. The lamp smoke is constant. Frost forms on the canvas above their heads as they breathe. This was a coffin for 25 men to wait inside. And they had to ration food they already knew wasn't going to be enough. By late October, the rations are dog biscuits. By December, they're cut in half. By spring, they're cut again and again, until each man is getting 12 ounces of food a day. When the winter sea ice starts breaking up, the men work the shoreline for what Greely called shrimp. These weren't shrimp the way that we're picturing them though. These were tiny crustaceans, 5 to 10 millimeters long, about the size of a grain of rice. It took 1,500 of them to fill half of a cup. It's basically nothing. The men spent hours straining freezing water through cloth to harvest the few mouthfuls. Then they boiled them and ate them whole, shells and everything. By April, they were also eating boot soles, boiled sealskin straps, lichen scraped off rocks, bird droppings, and candle wax. And Brainard kept writing. Every meal, every ration cut, every failed hunt. January 18th, 1884, Sergeant William Cross dies, scurvy and malnutrition. He was the first. The deaths after that come in clusters. April 5th, Frederick Christian dies. the Greenlandic hunter who helped set the furthest north record, the man whose skill had carried Lockwood and Brainard to the highest latitude any human has ever reached, the man who without him there would have been no triumph. He died in the tent in the dark, in a country that wasn't his, surrounded by men that would mostly outlive him, but only by a few weeks. Christensen had carried these men. He'd brought them to the highest latitude anyone had ever reached, and he hunted for them, he sledged with them, he survived for them, and then in the end, he died in a tent in the dark, and his name barely appears on the official histories. The Lockwood-Brainard record, the American achievement, as if Christensen was just a passenger and not the expert who got them there. April 9th, 2 more deaths in one day. James Lockwood, the famous officer, the record holder, falls unconscious and then dies. The same day, George Rice dies returning from an attempt to recover meat from a cache miles away. April 24th, Jens Edward, the second Inuit hunter, drowns. He was trying to harpoon seal. He was still hunting, still trying to feed the others, still working when the cold water took him. Both Inuit men dead. Both still trying to keep the rest of the expedition alive when they did. The deaths keep coming. May 19th, May 23rd, May 24th, 27th, June 1st, June 3rd. Brainard wrote every single one of them down. The dates, the names, the causes. He was watching his comrades die one by one, and he was the guy with the pencil. And he was beginning to notice something else. Something happening to the bodies after they died. Something he wasn't ready to write about yet. Private Charles Henry. That wasn't his real name. He'd joined the US Army under an assumed identity, but his real name Charles Henry Buck. German-born, a thief and imposter with a criminal past. Greely didn't know this when he was assigned to the expedition though. At Cape Sabine, Henry's behaviour was getting worse. He'd been caught stealing food. Once, twice, 3 times. Bacon, alcohol, and then on June 6, 1884, the camp's morning shrimp ration. While men were dying around him, he was taking from the stores that weren't his. Greely's options were limited, because there was no jail in Cape Sabine, no way to confine the man, no food to spare for someone who couldn't be trusted. So he wrote out an order in military prowess, almost bureaucratic in tone. 3 men would form a firing party, 2 rifles loaded with live charges, 1 with a blank, so that no man would know that it was their rifle that fires the fatal shot. That was the official procedure. That was what Greely wrote down. The execution would take place at 2 o'clock that afternoon. The men were ordered to keep silent about it, and these were Greely's words, to avoid public scandal until an official report could be made. 3 men were assigned to the firing party: Sergeant David Brainard, Sergeant Francis Long, Private Julius Frederick. Brainard, our diary writer, the man who had been recording everything that happened inside the shelter, was now being asked to shoot one of his own comrades. And here's a part that's important to get right. Greely's written order is preserved. 3 rifles, 1 blank, 2 live rounds. That's the version most people have heard. But Brainard later admitted something different. The rifles in the camp were broken down, different calibers. Most of them were not fit to fire reliably anymore. When the moment came, only 1 rifle was actually used. 1 bullet. And Brainard, Long and Frederick drew lots between them to decide who would fire it. The 3 men swore an oath, that day, never to reveal the one that actually killed Charles Henry. That secret died with them. Brainard's diary entry on June 6, 1884, in full. Charles B. Henry confessed to stealing the shrimps. The order was duly executed at 2 p.m. And that's it, the entire entry. A man recording an execution he may have personally carried out in just 2 sentences. And it's easy to come back to, with the compassion of the language, the almost bureaucratic tone. Brainard wasn't writing this for other people, he was writing it for himself. And what he chose not to say is as loud as what he wrote. After Henry died, more deaths followed within hours. Jacob Bender the same night, Dr. Pavey minutes later. June 12th, Hampton Gardner. June 18th, Roger Schneider, who was begging for opium to hasten the end. By June 22nd, only 7 men were still breathing inside Camp Clay, and something was happening to the dead. Joseph Ellison was the worst case among the living. His hands and feet had been frozen, gangrene. The other men had tied a spoon to the stump of his right hand so that he could feed himself. The detail isn't folklore, that's in the official rescue report. When Captain Schlee's relief party arrived on June 22nd, 1884, what they found was almost beyond description. The shelter had partially collapsed, the canvas was down, meltwater had flooded the floor, 2 bodies lay outside on the ice, graves nearby had heads and feet protruding through the thin gravel. Schlee's men had to lift the canvas to get inside. Greely was in his sleeping bag, thin almost to a skeleton. His long hair was matted, his clothes hadn't been changed in 6 to 8 months. His feet and joints were swollen. Brainard, Frederick and Beiderbecke were so excited they tried to stand and walk, then collapsed and had to be carried. Connell was near death, his eyes fixed and glassy. Joseph Ellison was alive in his bag, the spoon still tied to his stump of his right hand. Greely's first words to Schlee were just, "I am so glad to see you." 6 men barely alive: Greely, Brainard, Frederick, Long, Connell, Beiderbecke. And Joseph Ellison was alive, but dying. He would die during the journey home on July 8th. The dead, 19 of them, were buried in shallow graves around the camp, and when Captain Schlee prepared the bodies for transport home, his official report recorded something he had tried to explain away. 6 of the corpses had been cut, flesh removed. The cuts were consistent with butchery. The 6 corpses were Kislingbury, Jewell, Ralston, Whistler, Henry and Ellis. Schlee's explanation in writing was that the survivors had been removing flesh to use as bait for catching shrimp. That explanation didn't survive long. The bodies arrived back in the United States in early August 1884. They were turned over to grieving families for proper burial, and one of those families, the family of Frederick Kislingbury, Greely's disgraced second-in-command, had him exhumed and examined before they would consent to burying him. They wanted to see what had happened to him. What they found wasn't bait removal, it was butchery. Physicians decide that the skin and muscles were removed with a knife. That wasn't a scandal that broke decades later. This wasn't historians digging up a forgotten story a century after the fact. This was the families of the dead opening the coffins and finding out within 3 weeks of the rescue what their sons and brothers had been used for in their final weeks in Cape Sabine. The survivors had come home as national heroes. The truth was on the front pages before they'd even finished their welcome dinners. Greely denied general knowledge of what had happened, said he had never authorised it, said he hadn't personally seen it. Brainard backed him in public. The Navy's official report, the Schlee document, quietly recorded the cuts but kept the bait explanation. The framing was meant to protect the survivors for criminal damage and the expedition's legacy from total destruction. The press refused to let it go though. For weeks in late 1884, the newspapers kept running the story. Physicians kept being quoted, families kept speaking, but the cover-up didn't fully fail and it didn't fully succeed. It just settled into the background, into the kind of half-known thing that everyone in the right rooms understood and nobody said it out loud. Greely kept his career. Brainard kept his secret. The dead kept their dignity in name only. Adolphus Greely's career didn't end at Cape Sabine. It continued. He was promoted. He rose to Major General. He helped found the National Geographic Society. He wrote books. He gave lectures. He became a respected elder statesman of American exploration. David Brainard followed him, promoted, eventually general himself. Both men spent the rest of their lives defending the official version of events. And then, in 1935, 51 years after the bodies came home, Adolphus Greely received the Medal of Honor, the highest military decoration in the United States. The citation reads, "For a life of splendid public service." He was 91 years old. David Brainard kept his diary, the camp clay notebook, the one he'd written by oil lamp inside a stone shelter while his comrades died around him. He never published it during the cover-up years. He let Greely's official account dominate. He didn't contradict the bait story in print. He didn't name who fired that rifle that killed Charles Henry. He kept the diary quietly, privately, for the rest of his life. Eventually, he gave it to Dartmouth College. It's there now. You can read the actual pages online, the handwriting, the dates, almost bureaucratic entries that get shorter as more men die. And that's it from me, guys. Let us know in the comments, do you think they were eating the bodies, or do you think it really was for shrimp bait? Also, on screen right now, 2 videos I think you're going to absolutely love. I would highly recommend our video on the Franklin Expedition. My name's Joe, this was Buried Earth. Thank you so much for watching.